Today I've been working on some chest hinges that are sort of a long strap hinge, and I thought it might be interesting to take a look at some of what goes into a hinge. And I thought we would do that by looking at some smaller cabinet size hinges. These are a relatively simple hinge, as assembled hinges go anyways, and they're overall about 7.5 inches long. And I think this is a good project. Hardware is fun to make. It's a functional project. You can use it in the shop, you can use it in your house. While we have done lots of hinge work on the channel on previous episodes, we've never really done it as a how-to presentation. It's always been a little bit here and a little bit there, or a couple of very nice professional productions on forging a strap hinge, and those are worth going back and taking a look at. But today I hope we can explain all of the little steps and the details and the tooling that you need to do hinges. Really not as complicated as it might sound. It will also give us a chance to try out one of the guillotine tools we just made the other day. So let's get started and take a look at what it's going to take to make a pair of little cabinet hinges. I'm going to start with 2 pieces of 1/8 by 3/4, 6 inches long, and 2 pieces of 1/8 by 1.5 by 3 inches long. Additionally, we will need some 1/4 inch round stock to make pins out of. Ideally, this should be cold rolled round because that comes in an exact size, whereas hot rolled round is often a little bit oversized. So cold rolled will work better for hinge pins. The good news is it's hard to find hot rolled round, so you're probably only going to be able to get cold rolled in this size anyways. This is pretty much just a project for forge, hammer, and anvil. There is one specialty tool that is pretty much required though, and it doesn't have to be anything special, and that is a pin or a drift to help shape the eye. You can use your pin stock that you're going to use for the hinge ultimately, but it's liable to deform and mushroom and bend because it's mild steel. I like S7 for this. And it's just a tapered pin. In this case, it's 5 inches long. It's 1/4 inch diameter in the center for about, 1/3 or maybe a little bit more here. Tapers more at one end than it does the other, but this end tapers as well. So the long taper helps you insert it into the hinge eye as you forge it. You shape the hinge eye around the fat section, and then as you drive it through, it falls out easily because of the short taper on the other side. So S7 just holds up way better than the mild steel pins, but for just one set of hinges, a mild steel pin would be fine. Additionally, we will probably use a cutoff hardy and a guillotine tool with butcher dies in it, but this isn't absolutely necessary. There are other ways to achieve what we will be doing with both of these tools if you don't have these tools. They're just an option. When we get to the cold work, we'll use files, filing vise, hacksaw, drill, that kind of stuff. But again, those are common shop tools, and there's more than one way to pull this off if you don't have those. But for the basic forging, it's really pretty straightforward. The most critical part on a hinge is the eye. If the eye doesn't run smooth, the hinge isn't going to run smooth. To make a nice clean eye, we want to start with a piece that has a 45-degree bevel on the edge, and that bevel is going to face up. And we're going, as we roll this around, that bevel tucks in right here at the edge and makes a very nice, clean, neat eye. For this style hinge, there are other styles of hinge, but for this type of eye, a simple rolled eye, the 45-degree bevel really helps. So when we start this, we're going to start right at the edge of the anvil. A curved space on the edge is ideal, and just start working. Advance it a little bit each blow. The idea is to not hit it the same place over and over again because that'll make a kink in it. You want a nice rolled edge, and you want this edge at the 45-degree bevel, the sharpest part, to be able to tuck in as it comes around. If you don't get that right now, you're not going to be able to get back to it later. We want to forge that little bevel on the end and keep it really short. You're not trying to draw out a 1/2 inch or so of this. You just want a little 45-degree bevel. And if you turn it upside down and hold the piece at 45. You can just work it against the edge of the anvil right there. And that's a pretty good way to do that. However, this piece, I just ground that in. If you've got a grinder and can grind the 45, or if you can saw it off, or if you have a 45-degree cutoff tool, any of that will work, just as long as you have a nice bevel. Keeping a short heat on this helps as well, so it doesn't deform so much. I'm just kind of working the hammer this way, and as it starts to go around, then I can come up to the top of the anvil. Again, I'm kind of using drawing blows, and I'm going to raise the back of the hinge, and I'm going to look at it regularly. If something starts to go off, this is the time to fix it. And then we'll get it hot again. I know some people that insert the pin at this point and roll it up around the pin, but I always end up knocking the pin loose and have to pick it up off the floor. So I try to get a perfect eye without the pin, kind of as a personal challenge, and then guarantee that it's right by using the pin. We'll continue to work this around. You use the peen to kind of tuck that in just a little bit. And keep an eye on it. Both sides don't always roll up the same, so if one eye's rolling up more, you're going to need to work the other side a little bit. And whatever surface of the anvil you need to get that to roll up. I don't know if you can see this or not, but it's not quite. The point is tucking in, so I'm going to need to take another heat and roll that, and then I'll insert my pin. And it's pretty darn close. So I'll just keep rolling that up just a little bit until it looks pretty good. And I have to dance with your anvil a little bit to get that to roll up just the way you want it to. That's tight enough. The pin's just going to be a little snug, and I should have enough heat to go ahead and drive that through and kind of refine that eye. Again, keep it moving. You're going to create flat spots or kinks or something in here. We don't want any of that. The rounder you can create the eye, the better your hinge is going to look. You might have to get it hot. It's really getting too cold to forge here. But because of that top taper, I can just drive that pin out. At this point, that pin has been in hot iron. It's hotter than you're going to want to pick up, so use tongs to pick it up from this point forward. So I'm going to reinsert the pin. Try not to let it slide all the way through. I'm going to try and correct the little lump that I saw there. And pretty much that's all I need to do at this point. It pays to look at the pin in relationship to the hinge and make sure it's 90 degrees and it's not canted off somewhere, because that'll really affect the way your hinge works. So that's the eye. That's the critical part. Now let's do the little short strap and do the eye on it as well, so we can look at it forging another eye. This one's essentially the same, but it's wider, so you have to make sure you work all the way across. And it's also shorter, so it's a little bit harder to control at the anvil. So it might be worth leaving this attached to the parent stock initially anyways, till you get the eye done and then cut it off. And that's what I do frequently. Just keep going back and forth here. And working here at the edge of the anvil to support this sometimes helps, as would standing it up on the anvil this way. Just remember not to get carried away. Yeah, I really think leaving this connected to the parent bar would have made this go much, much smoother. Would have been a lot easier to control. But that doesn't mean we have to. Because of the style hinge this is, it's this piece that the edges on both ends are going to show. So you want to really make sure that those look good. The middle of this piece will be cut out, so anything dead center won't show because it'll be gone. Now this is really pretty good, and there's no reason you can't do all of this just exactly this way. But there is a tool that I kind of hesitate to show you that can help correct some little oddities. It can help get into the corner of the wrap and help give you a way to straighten things out. I certainly wouldn't take the time to make this tool. I don't know what you'd call it. It's sort of a scroll starter, sort of a swedge. Very much a shop-made tool. Comes in real handy if I'm doing a dozen or so hinge eyes in a morning. It helps correct the occasional one that goes off. But it is not required, so don't feel like you have to make one of those. So that's all we're going to do to that for now. For short or long strap for the hinge, I want to put a spade finial. It's either a spade or a spear point, depending on how you want to look at it. But I'm going to cut that off to 45-degree angle first to make my life a little bit easier. And we'll just do that at the Hardy. We just want about a 45-degree angle. Remember, don't cut all the way through. Hard on the Hardy and hard on your hammer. So it's better to get it close and just break that off. And throw the hot bit someplace where you're not going to step on it. In the long run, I want that point centered, so I'm just going to forge it over to the center. The idea is just to center that cut edge. You want something about like that. Now we're going to go to the guillotine tool we made the other day with butchering dies in it. And we're going to put that point and just a touch of what the flat bar still is, the full 1-inch width, through there, with the bevel towards the eye. We want a straight edge at the front edge of the straight edge by the finial and a taper here. And that sets that up for us. You might need to work from both sides. There's generally more effect on the top of the top die than there is the bottom die. But that's really all we need at this point. Now this guillotine tool is a little bit loose in here because it's the one we made for a 1-inch Hardy hole, and I'm using it in my anvil with a 1.25-inch Hardy hole. Using that Hardy hole though, I can now start to draw this out by hooking the finial over the edge. I can do some of that here, but my tongs might get in the way in the long run. So we're going to have to fiddle around a little bit to try and keep everything going just perfectly. And I just want to put a nice graceful taper from full width back here to what we butchered in here. And you also want to keep it relatively thin in the thickness. Like I say, the tongs can get in the way. Just keep it all straight and even. It's going to want to mushroom and fold over in this direction, the height-wise. So you just have to keep correcting that continuously as you do this. So there's a fair amount of fiddle going on here. The cleaner you make it now, the less filing you will do later. That's looking pretty good. Next thing I want to do is I want to put a little bevel, forged bevel on the edge of this, just because I like the look, and I will file that bevel more crisply later. This bevel just goes full width. Be careful with your hammer blows. You want to hit the hinge piece, not your anvil. One way to help clean this up is to actually put it up on the anvil. Well, this is such a short strap, this isn't going to work very well. But tip the hinge up on the anvil so that you are hammering flat on the back, or parallel with the back, I should say. And that can kind of clean that bevel up if you've got a lot of unsightly hammer marks. That's really all we need to do to the strap portion of this for now. Let's finish the finial. Now with the good side down, I'm going to put this right at the edge of the anvil and peen in the center, half face blows. I'm creating a little step right at the beginning of the finial. And I'm going to work out the far side, work back to the near side, and watch what's happening and correct any odd shapes as you go. And you should be able to get a pretty nice finial right off the anvil without needing to go and grind and file too much. It's always going to be a little bit, but the better you do at the anvil, the less filing and grinding later. Now remember, we need 2 of these. So take the time to make the second one the same length, width, and general shape as close as possible to the first one. Pretty good. Now for the short strap, I just want to peen it wider and make it flare, kind of a butterfly shape. I'm going to make it a lot thinner at this edge and work it more, and even take the peen and work the corner out that way a little bit. Make sure it lies flat when you're done. It's essentially what we're after, but there again, you want to make it match. So the first one I did is a little bit wider, so I need to spread this one just a little bit more. Try and get the edges to flare evenly so it looks nice and neat and clean. And there will be less work to do with the file later. Those are pretty darn close. There'll still be some filing to make them exact. Well, let's let all this stuff cool, and I'll meet you over at the bench. At this point, my preference is to clean up the forging with a file before I do any assembly work. And that helps me guarantee that my eye is smooth on the outside before I try to fit it to the other piece. But I also make sure the finial looks good. I'm just done with all that filing. So the first thing is to file the profile and get it good and straight. And we did a very good job forging these edges, I must say so myself. So there's going to be very little filing. It's just to knock any high spots off, any little hammer divots, And this is optional. If you want a rougher hinge, you don't need to do that. If you want a more refined hinge, it's worth taking the trouble to do the filing. And you can do this very easily in the vise, just like this. And I'm making sure I get the eye so it's nice and smooth, and right up to the finial. And I will frequently slightly undercut these spade finials just to give it kind of a lobe. And then work around. And a half-round file is all you need for all of this. Now if you're filing straight across, it's a little coarse. So in the end, if you want it smooth, pull it back towards you or draw a file, and you end up with a little bit smoother file pattern. Now it is easier to see what you're doing on this if we go to the filing vise. And we looked at filing vices pretty recently here, but I'll try to link to the video talking about filing vices, and that link will be right up here. This does require you to file at an angle at this point, but that's okay. But I can very clearly see what I'm doing. And that makes it much easier to get the bevel right, or the finial, but it makes it very easy for the bevel. You just file flat now, and it can create a very nice bevel. It's a little odd on the curved parts because you got to work around them, but you'll figure that out. With this long stretch, and this does not match exactly the forged bevel, so that creates two different little shadow lines there. And again, this is all optional. Just depends on how clean and refined you want your hinge to look. A lot of people like them just as forged with some hammer marks and all that. That's really all there is to that initial filing. You can file the whole flat if you want to. That would be an even more refined looking hinge. But I like the nice crisp filed bevels in contrast with the forged surface. Now this might take just a little bit more work, but it won't be too bad. And you can either make this straight or you can give it a little bit of a curve. And you can do decorative file work, but we're not going to do that on this piece today. We will do a little bit on the long strap though, but very little. Try to make both sides match. Boy, I'm sorry about that squeal. Let me put that further down, that'll help. Oh, much better. And then this is another place where we'll do a bevel. That looks pretty even there. I still need to do the back side. That gets a little harder to do because there's no way to hold it as well as you would like. So that's something I will go back to the, boy, just barely, back to the vise without the filing vise, because now I can get in here. I'm going to start by filing straight across. Then again, I'm going to create a concave surface. You can see kind of what we're going for there. This has got a sharp point, and this is kind of rounded, so I'm going to have to work on this a little bit here. Not a real critical thing. Let's go back to the filing vise. They say the bevel's a little tough because the vise is in the way. But not impossible. So do that to all 4 pieces, and then we'll do just a little decorative touch to this piece. What I'd like to do for just a little touch of class on this hinge is just 2 little parallel lines. It's a very common element in colonial style hinges anyways, and it's fairly easy to do with a file or a chisel. I think the file tends to look a little bit neater and cleaner, but you can do it with a chisel. Just don't cut all the way through. Now to do this, I use a piece of angle iron in the vise. And I set my hinge on the angle iron and just take a pair of vice grips and clamp it down. You use the same half round file, you're just using the corner, and go slow till you create a line here, because it's real easy to skate around a little bit and get all sorts of little chop marks. Because this is a fairly thin hinge, I'm going to move it to the side and kind of file that slot all the way around the corner there. And while I'm here, I'll go ahead and start the second one. This is one reason the file version tends to look a little bit better, is because you can kind of round around the edge a little bit. You don't want to really, don't loosen the vice grips. You aren't really trying to file a notch in the side though. That's really all there is to it. And I use the first one as a guide to mark the second one, and I'll do the same thing. At this point is a good idea to go ahead and put your holes in. I think a hinge this size, 3 screws or clinch nails are just fine. I typically use number 8 screws, so I like a 3/16 hole or thereabouts, and 3 screws on this piece as well. And we'll go ahead and center punch these. Now your choice of how to put the holes in is really just up to you. On this thin finial, it's really not too hard to do it cold with a punch and a bolster, as long as you get everything lined up nicely. But I find the 1/8 inch material that in a hole this small is kind of hard to punch that way. So I don't tend to do them like that. A drill press is an awfully handy way to do it. And yes, you could punch these hot, but hot is going to deform this a little bit, and on these hinges I like nice straight smooth sides, so I prefer not to punch them hot. I am, on the other hand, fortunate enough to have this Whitney punch that makes short work of it cold. You just have to make sure you get your line up just right. You really have to punch a lot of holes to make this worthwhile. But these punches do last a lot longer than drill bits. It's quick, it's simple, it's not going to spin out of control. Not that my drill press is a problem with that, but and we'll go ahead and use the treadle hammer to put my touch mark on here. Sometimes I do this hot, but these are somewhat delicate, so I'm just going to do it cold. They don't really need it to be a hot impression. So we have our parts forged, filed, holes are in them, but they don't exactly go together yet. So we need to cut a knuckle so that this goes together and makes a hinge. That's pretty simple to do. By the way, there's the touch mark if you haven't seen it. It's just my last name with a bare paw. So we know that I've got 3/4 of an inch of bar here, and this is 1.5 inches. So I'm going to come in 3/8 of an inch from each side and make a mark. Now, just in case I filed something a little undersize, I'm going to double check these marks and make sure that my hinge really fits. And what I want to do, it looks like, is just barely take away most of the pencil mark on this. But look at it, compare, make sure you know how much. If you take too much, you get a really ugly fit. The goal here is that this piece should barely fit between your cut or not quite fit at all at this stage. So I'm going to use a hacksaw to cut that. You want to cut till you just break through on the bottom. Get rid of this piece, I'm going to chisel it out. And I have a straight-sided chisel that gets in there pretty close, but it's better if I get some of this out of my way first. I'm just going to take a bar. This happens to be kind of a set tool with a squared end, but just a scrap piece of 1/2 inch square bar would work. And I'm just going to drive that middle down. Make sure you don't drive the edges down, or you're going to start all over again. And that offsets that a little bit. It'll make it easier to cut that later. And I just take my chisel, cut across where I want to separate it, which is pretty much right in line with the edge of the knuckle. And I'm just going to cut most of the way through. I don't have a cutting plate under this. I don't want to cut into my anvil. I just want to make a nice weak spot. We'll put that back in the vise. I got a little pair of needle nose vice grips that fit a whole manner of different size hinges to do this. I just break that off. Now we see if we're close. And that doesn't quite fit. Perfect. That's what I want. Now what I'm filing are the edges. I'm using the flat of the file. I am cutting a little down because I know I can take a little more material there, but you're not pushing down, you're pushing over. And you just want to go until that just barely fits, and then look for high spots. Have you been filing straight? Not quite. Looks like this back corner here is a little high. That fits much better. Now I'm going to take a square file and clean up this bottom. I just want to make it smooth and clean and get rid of any rag from the chisel cut. At this point, I like to make sure my hole is the right size. So I run a 1/4 inch drill bit through that piece and a 1/4 inch drill bit through this piece. See, that one's not quite right. And then I use a slightly undersized 1/4 inch pin just to test fit, because I don't have to drive this in. And that guarantees that my hinge is going to work. Now I'll put the regular pin in. Now my regular pin, like I said, is 1/4 inch material. And I cut these to 1 3/4. So it's just a 1/4 inch longer than my 1.5 inch hinge plate. These are cold rolled mild steel, but cold rolled work hardens just a little bit when they're rolling it. So I cut them to length. I sand or file the edges to make a little bevel right here so they go in easily. And then I heat them up in the forge and let them air cool to make sure they're soft so I can peen them over cold. Otherwise you'd have to use a torch to do that. Assemble the hinge. Because of this flare, I can't put that all the way up on the anvil. You got to be aware of that as you drive this. So go slow in case it hangs up. I'm just going to center the pin. And you could put a little spacer under here when you peen this, but if you just kind of hold it up in the air a little bit, you don't really need to. And I use the cross peen to start it. I want to guarantee that I've got enough to keep that pin from falling out later. That's pretty much all there is to it. Now odds are you will not be able to open this at this point. That's pretty much typical, don't worry about it. Just a little bit of your favorite oil in here might be all it takes to loosen this up. We already know it works because we tested it. Now be careful doing this, because you pull too hard, you can actually start to uncurl these little bits of the hinge here. But we know now that's going to work. The next thing that I typically do, now you can work these back and forth until they loosen up a little bit, but I'm going to go put it in the fire and heat it up, because that gives the best fit and finish to the hinge. So I'm going to heat this up in the forge, but I'm mostly concerned at this point about the hinge joint. So I'm going to fold it back up and put it in so the hinge joint gets hotter than the rest of the hinge. It's also the heaviest part, so it's going to be a little harder to get hot. So be careful and don't overheat it. You can also just do this gently with a torch. The idea now is to just very gently work that back and forth, and it kind of self-adjusts a little bit and laps the edges, kind of rubs the scale and helps smooth out that joint some. And then as it cools, it should fit pretty darn well. But I want to go ahead and get the whole hinge just to a dull glow. Look at it, make sure there's no twists or bends or warps, make any corrections that need to be made, and then we'll put some wax on it. Now if you don't want a black finished hinge, you'll just have to work more at it cold with oil and not worry about heating it up too much, or you're going to have to file it after you do the assembly and work the joint end. Again, make sure it's straight, but you don't want to do any heavy forging, so it needs to be pretty darn good at this point already. Now we're going to let that cool so it's still too hot to touch, but not too hot to wax. So the wax should smoke just lightly, so this is a perfect heat for this. Get the whole thing coated. Another advantage to the wax, besides inhibiting rust a little bit, is that it helps lubricate the hinge joint so that it'll run smoother. But don't let it build up on the surface. You want it to soak in. This is like seasoning a cast iron skillet. You want it into the pores, which is why we do it hot. And then just wipe it off. And that's really all there is to it. There we have a simple little pair of cabinet hinges. Nice little detail for a kitchen cabinet or just a tool cabinet in your shop or whatever you want to use them for. When I make a set of hinges, I always include the screws. I always use slotted head screws because I think Phillips head screws look out of place on forged iron work. And I strip the plating off. I buy normal hardware store screws. I strip the plating off in a weak acid solution. White vinegar will do the trick. And then I run them through the forge to blacken them. Just heat them up, wax them, just like I do the finish here. And there's a video I'll try to link up here in the corner of talking about how to prepare hardware for forge work. But I think the slotted head screws look way better than Phillips. And taking the time to color match them is really a nice touch instead of using zinc screws on black iron. You have an option of round head screws or countersunk screws. For this case, I used a non-countersunk hole, so it'll get round head wood screws to finish these. If you do flathead wood screws, make sure you countersink these holes before you do that final blackening, so that the countersink part isn't a bright silver circle around the workpiece there. There have been lots of requests for various styles of hinges, so this is just a brief look at one style that would work for a cabinet. If you're making these for a specific cabinet, make sure you take a moment to know what's going to look right on the cabinet and make it to fit. This may not fit every piece of cabinetry out there, but this is just a generic set of hinges at this point, and I'll sell them to somebody that doesn't need a specific size or that this suits what they're building. Well, I hope that was interesting. I hope it was educational and that you got something out of it. Great time to go out to your shop and make a little set of hinges if you'd like to, or make something else. But as always, do try to get out to your shop. If you'd like to help support this channel financially, there is a link down in the description for PayPal for a single donation, or Patreon if you want to make a monthly donation. There's no obligation, no expectation. The content is free and will always remain free. That is simply a donation if you so choose. But that's all I've got for today. So stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.